Good evening, councillors and staff and everybody watching online, and welcome to our Agenda Forum. Agenda forums are specifically for agenda items which are to be considered by Council at the next ordinary meeting of Council. Agenda forums are not decision-making forums. They provide an opportunity for councillors to be equally informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of such matters to the next ordinary meeting of Council for formal consideration and decision. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. The recording will also be archived and made available on the Council's website after the meeting. If you choose to participate in a meeting during public question time or deputation time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to Council and other members of the community. Visual images of the public will not be captured. Attendance and apologies, Madam CEO. I'll have one from Mr Mike Foley, and also Councillor Prodovnik has advised that she's an apology. Are there any others?
No others, Mr Mayor.
Declaration of financial and proximity interest and interest affecting impartiality.
Mr Mayor, we have an impartiality interest from Councillor Zanino for item 13.8 in Part A, which is the Midland Oval redevelopment, as a former business partner owns land on the Crescent. We have an impartiality from Councillor McCulloch for item 3.6, which is the RA report for the proposed service station in Bullsbrook, as there is an association leading to an impartiality. We also have one from yourself, Mr Mayor, for item 3.6, a financial interest as owners of the property own other businesses that you do business with. We have Councillor Bryce Parry for item 3.9, an impartiality interest for the MRS determination of proposed classrooms for Suffolk Street, Caversham. We have Councillor Congerton for item 3.11, which is the SAT reconsideration of the security poles and impartiality interest, as Dynamic Planning has worked as a consultant for one of his companies. And one from myself, Mr Mayor, for item 4.1, an impartiality interest in the renaming section of Liberté Crescent, Baskerville, as family members have signed the petition. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Acting CEO. Are there any others from any councillors or staff? Councillor Coley.
Mayor, would my impartiality interest in the item related to 136 Swan Street, the polls, would that carry over from the previous consideration? Or would have to put in a new one? A new one. Thank you.
Okay, so we declare that as well. Okay. Any further declarations? Be none. Carry on now.
I just missed that bit about the. Was there some interest in Midland Oval? Did you say that?
Councillor Nino has declared an interest, as he always does.
Which was that item for? Sorry.
Which is
3.8. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, it's 13.8 in Part A.
13.8 is the actual number.
13.8. Thank you.
Public question time. We don't have public question time, do we? Public question time. Questions relating to reports contained on the agenda for which due notice has been given. I have nil. Questions without notice relating to items on the agenda. I have none. That takes us now to reports and motions of which previous notice has been given, presentations and deputations. Firstly, on item 13.6, the filling of land at lot 752 and associated lots, Plymouth Street, Woodbridge. Councillors, you will have a written deputation which is confidential from the owner of that land on your desk, and there are in-person deputations, firstly from Miss Lynn Deering. Miss Deering, are you with us? Yes, you'd just like to come to the podium and do your deputation, please. And just turn the speaker on there. That's it, and you have
Correct.
5 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Lynn Deering, resident 51 Homesdale Road, Woodbridge. 7 weeks back, Friends of Woodbridge presented a petition. The petition outlined how, in acquiring 3 lots, Council would protect the connection to adjoining spaces between Guildford and Midland. enabling preservation of a wildlife habitat and an existing green corridor. We appreciate Council's deferral in making a decision at last meeting and asking Council staff to complete and present a report which takes in consideration of our petition. Today we respond to that Council report. This Council report reflects the 15-year history of these lots. It mentions how Council 7 years ago rejected development of the same 3 lots due to damage to the streetscape. Even then, the Council recognised and understood the land's significance and value. Sadly, it was on SAT's advice that the then Council was forced to overturn their decision. How different things might be today had SAT not interfered. Interestingly, the report also reminds Council that 15 years ago it questioned WAPC on the zoning of this area, which remains unanswered still today. To the report's credit, it highlights gaps in definitions and limitations of the planning framework and 1978 schemes, interpreting the removal of growth trees as if they make no difference to streetscapes or amenity is concerning. It raises that we have no policy to protect existing old growth trees, city canopy and no current tree policy. It indicates the low priority given to habitat and wildlife protection in our city. This report is based on a statutory planning viewpoint. Its nature is compliance, not strategic. It has not taken on board what has been outlined by the petition and deals too limitedly with options to acquire the land. The acquisition of land can occur via many means. In our view, the report falls short, does not meet Council's directives from the last meeting, particularly as outlined by the petition. The report proposes 3 options. However, we would like to propose a 4th. In doing so, this will not hold back the owner who can proceed within the proposed development. Our proposal addresses the report's limitations, responds to the petition, and does offer retention of a critical portion of the nature corridor that includes Lot 2. Our 4th option that we hope you will support, because it's a win-win for the Council, it's a win-win for your community, and it's a win-win for the current applicant. Our 4th option is that Council may resolve to approve the proposed filling of land at Lot 171 and portions of Lot 2 and Lot 172 Plymouth Street, Woodbridge, subject to conditions. 2. Council seeks alternatives to protect Lot 2 as an established wildlife corridor. That Council investigate and respond to the proposed protection and preservation for future generations the portions of land identified as Swan River Trust and the land between Woodbridge-Guildford borders as part of a green conservation corridor
You have 1
in
minute.
perpetuity.
1 minute.
In this way, the applicant will be able to proceed within the proposed development within proposed conditions as applied. The Council is able to investigate best options to retain a critical portion of the nature corridor that includes Lot 2 and responds to the concerns of the community, the petition and the reports. Thank you, and please consider our 4th option.
Thank you, Ms Deering. Councillors, just Ms Deering, so you know that your written deputation was sent out to councillors on Tuesday the 15th. Questions, councillors? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, Ms Deering.
Ms Deering, would you just like to come back to the microphone for the questions, please? Thank you.
May I ask a very clear explanation, but can you explain what you propose should happen to Lot 2, which is a small triangular low-lying lot?
Lot 2 is the most treed. Lot 2 is also very flood prone. Lot 2 is also the area that is least likely to support development. And what we see is that Lot 2 acts as a connection between what is existing land, access with the Swan River Trust land, with the land that's currently zoned flood prone, and it will act as a link between the two. So it joins up the two areas. So Lot 2 enables the connection to the remaining space and links into Woodbridge Meadows. Does that explain? It helps to link the two pieces of land together, the two areas together, leading to Woodbridge Meadows.
I understand the purpose of retaining it with its trees, but it's owned by Mr. Fitzpatrick at the moment. What would you suggest we do to protect the trees and to protect that piece of land?
In relation to Lot 2? It is our belief that it is possible to acquire that land. Right? It is still possible. The issue in the current report is that it doesn't look at the options into the acquisition. So it has looked at the very narrow form of acquisition. And you all know there are a variety of ways in which land can be acquired, be that land swap, be that offset, be that grants, be that philanthropic, be that rezoning, which it still provides that opportunity. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? You got a question? Okay, well, we are going through these items at the end with staff, councillor, so you can do it then. No further questions of Ms Deering? Thank you, Ms Deering. Okay, our next speaker on this is Mr Jerry Crowley, speaking in regards to the petition. He's not here?
No.
Okay.
He was told he was unable to speak, so he was notified that he was not given time to speak this afternoon. So Jerry has not left work early to get here.
Okay, because I've got him on the agenda, that's all. Okay.
He phoned and he was told he was unable to speak.
Okay, we can't comment on that. There was also, councillors, a written deputation from Mr Ashby, which was emailed out to you on the 15th of September at 3 p.m. Okay. Yep. Question? What's a good question, Madam CEO?
Mr Mayor, we believe that he was scheduled to speak and we have an email to support that.
I've got him on the agenda to speak. So.
Mr Mayor, can I ask, would it be possible to allow him to speak next week at the beginning of the council meeting?
Well, if he sends me an email, we can consider it. Well, I'll
Thank
talk to
you.
the clerk and see what the issue was there today. Okay, councillors, that now takes us to Part B and item 2.2. You have a written deputation from Ms Cowan Mowat, which was sent out to you this morning at 10:57. Ms Mowat is not here. You now go to item 3.11, which is the State Administrative Tribunal reconsideration for the refusal of 6 security poles and associated infrastructure at Lot 206, number 136 Swan Street, Guildford. Councillors, there was a written deputation from Mr Stone sent out to councillors via email yesterday at 2:39, and Mr Stone is also here to do an in-person deputation. Mr Stone, are you with us? Okay, thank you, Mr Stone. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, good evening, Mr Mayor, members of the Council. Thank you for the opportunity of addressing the Council this evening. I know that times are difficult and we're all under stress to do things, but I do appreciate your time. So we felt it necessary this evening to present a deputation because of our concerns with the reapplication for the 6 security poles at 136 Swan Street. I should clarify, we reside at 132 Swan Street, which is the eastern neighbour to this construction site that has been progressing for some 6 years now. So we do not agree with the recommendation as of the revised proposal as recommended by planning. The reason for this is that we consider that the reapplication has very few differences to the original one, and the amendments are very minor. They do not address any of the concerns that we raised previously. So the 6 poles, they're associated with multiple floodlights, which actually increased during the reapplication. the excessively loud 107 decibel speaker systems, and the highly intrusive surveillance camera systems all remain unchanged as far as we're concerned. We will still be subject to the visual intrusiveness of these heavy-duty, excessively high, at up to 8.5 metres, industrial-type poles, which are highly visible from almost everywhere on our property, both inside and out. We will still have the western side of our property, verandas, barbecue area, pool, in direct sight of multiple cameras. Yes, there are surveillance regulations, but a camera pointing in a direction cannot but monitor what's happening in that direction. And with them pointing at us, we're inevitably going to be viewed by someone. It's probable these will be monitored externally, which just creates a more unsettling view. We will still have the floodlights on top of the poles, in which there are 2 on each pole of substantial power, and which will be visible from our property at their elevation. I'm aware that there has been light studies done and that they claim to be within Australian standards, and that's fair enough. But the reality of these high-level poles is they create a light pool which will be highly visible from multiple areas, including Stirling Square, the river, and also West Swan Road. We feel that they will attract attention rather than defer from it, to the effect that we would suggest that this may actually have a negative impact on surrounding properties. This industrial infrastructure is more appropriate to railway car parks, sports fields, or indeed prisons and residential areas, and particularly heritage areas where the maintenance of standards is more critical. We do not agree that a temporary approval can be considered at all, for these are permanent installations with all the issues noted previously. These structures have now been in place, as of today, for 413 days, without requisite approval, during which we have had to put up with their continual sentinel-like presence in the knowledge they should not be there. The outlook towards the Swan River, which has been enjoyed from our property for over a century, now has an intrusive 8.5 metre pole standing right in the middle of it. For the past 413 days, every time we enter our property from our driveway, all we see standing directly in front of us is an 8.5 metre pole, as a constant reminder. This continues to be a stressful and unsettling period for us, as the uncertainty and their presence simply cannot be avoided, and that is before anything is added to the top of them. It is clear the revised application should be refused in its entirety, as was the first application, and for the same reasons, i.e. the application is completely inappropriate for the area it's being put in. Should a further submission be made, the proposals must be substantially revised to meet appropriate requirements, regulations and aesthetics. It's suggested, from our side, that no pole should be considered above 2.4 metres, and that's the total height of the pole and its infrastructure on top. That setbacks from the road should be increased to reduce visibility from Swan Street and Stirling Square.
Mr. Stone, you have 1 minute.
I beg pardon?
You have 1 minute.
Oh, yeah, sorry. As is notified or identified in the Guildford Conservation Precinct documentation. And that the most intrusive pole, which is number 6, should be removed in its entirety and its camera perhaps relocated on an adjacent quite high retaining wall. If lights are required, they should be mounted at around 1.8 metres, as is more normal for residential type outdoor lighting. The extraordinary speaker systems must be removed. The potential impact of these and their associated lights being activated at any hour is quite unreasonable. There appears to be no real reason the lights and cameras could not be mounted off the building itself, or indeed other structures rather than intrusive poles. There are already cameras mounted off the building. In summary, there are many ways that the intent of these poles could be achieved by other more suitable means than the industrial system proposed. For us, this is yet another stressful retrospective application associated with this development that we have had to deal with. We take pride in Guildford and its surroundings and wish to retain its character.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. That's your 5 minutes.
That was exactly my last word.
Timed perfectly. Councillor Kylie, you have a question?
That's all right. I only have one more
Stone got
sentence,
right
and
at
that
the end,
was
sir.
thank you for allowing me the opportunity to make this deputation.
Questions? Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Mr. Stone, can you give a rationale for reducing the pole height to 2.4 metres?
Well, when we look at the heights of the poles at the moment, as I mentioned very early on, the heights they're at makes us in direct line of sight for cameras, and we feel that there's already been a recommendation made within the revised application that 3 metres is an adequate height. So we feel that 2.4, which is, I believe, is in the regulations as an acceptable height for poles of this nature, and hence we propose about 2.4 metres within as being reasonable, and it fits below the fence lines.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I have a question about that standard for the staff, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions, Mr. Stone, councillors? No. Thank you, Mr. Stone.
Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker on this item is Mr. Regan Cake from Dynamic Planning in support of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Cake, and you too have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor, Councillors and City of Swan officers. My name is Regan Cake from Dynamic Planning and Developments, and we are the applicants for the proposed security poles at 136 Swan Street in Guildford. As the applicants, we've worked closely with the City's officers for many months prior to the original refusal, and also since the SAP mediation held on site and at the City's offices. We are fully supportive of the proposed officer recommendation for temporary approval and consider that this will provide our clients with the necessary protection to enable them to complete the construction of their house, whilst also demonstrating to the adjoining neighbours and general public that the security system will have a negligible impact on the amenity of the area. The reason for our deputation tonight is to provide councillors with some background around why the security system is necessary, as well as providing an overview of how the complex security system will function. We will also address the relevant changes that have been made in response to the concerns of some neighbours and also councillors, which was raised and discussed during the recent SAP mediation. With regard to the reason for the security system, our client has regularly been the subject of attempted break-ins where they currently reside in Bassendean, and as a result living with a considerable amount of fear of not only property being stolen but also being assaulted during a break-in. This fear has led to more and more security being installed at their current residence, which has seemed to deter the criminals but hasn't stopped them completely. As they intend to relocate to Guildford in what will be a high-end residential dwelling with high-value furniture and fixtures installed, there is a necessity for a high-tech security system to be installed to protect them and also their property. Evidence of this necessity is further reinforced as our client has experienced regular vandalism of the existing construction site, which has resulted in their insurance premiums increasing to $25,000 per claim. It is considered that approval of the proposed security system will enable our client to live with peace of mind that they are safe within the confines of their own home. With regard to how the proposed security system will function, it is worth noting that it is designed to be incredibly accurate in order to reduce the frequency of false alarms and to reduce the impact on the amenity of the adjoining neighbours. The system will use a combination of thermal cameras, PTZ cameras and a light and speaker system. Initially, the intruders will be picked up through the thermal camera system, which is intended to be the early detection mechanism. The camera system is able to pick up intruders based on their thermal mass or heat. An example of the imagery that the cameras will show has been provided in the handout I sent out earlier. In order to ensure these cameras only detect humans, the cameras are set with a minimum thermal mass trigger and artificial intelligence processing to assess the detected object. This will ensure that animals such as household pets will not trigger the system. Should the thermal cameras identify an intruder, both the PTZ camera and lighting system will be triggered to track the intruder throughout the site and shine enough light on them to ensure the camera footage is able to identify the intruder and also record their actions. As the system is quadrant-based, only the light and camera in range of the intruder will be triggered. As the intruder moves through the site, the lights and cameras will turn on and off as the intruder moves in and out of range. In addition to the light and camera system on each pole, there will also be a small speaker installed in them, which will be triggered when the light and PTZ cameras are triggered. This will enable a verbal warning to be issued to the intruder. The volume of this warning will be no greater than a normal conversation between a standard person, and the intent is simply to advise the intruder that someone is watching. Should they not leave, the full alarm will be triggered. It is evident that this system is far more sophisticated than a standard camera and sensor lighting installed on the house, and as a result is far less likely to result in false alarms and annoy adjoining residents. As such, it is considered that the proposed security system achieves an appropriate balance between ensuring the necessary security is provided, whilst also minimising the impact on adjoining residents. With respect to the difference between the original application and the one before you tonight,
Yeah, 1 minute, Mr. Cake.
It is noted that a number of changes have been made, which includes 1. Seeking a temporary approval for a period of 24 months to allow a review of how the system will work during and after construction. 2, the modifications to the colour of the pole to a woodland grey to ensure they blend in with the surroundings and the extensively proposed landscaping. 3, the security system lighting has been removed from pole 3, which will ensure that all lighting will meet a 2 lux level at the adjoining properties, which is compliant with the applicable Australian standard relating to the control of outdoor lighting. 4, reducing the height of pole 3 to ensure that it is no higher than the boundary fence and will not be visible from the adjoining neighbour's property. 5, relocating pole 2 further north by 3 metres to ensure the pole aligns with the blank brick wall on the neighbouring property. It is commented that this modification, combined with the reduction in the height of pole 3, has actually resulted in the adjoining neighbour withdrawing their objection. Whilst these modifications would have ordinarily been included in the original application, our client was unaware of the intended renovations on this site.
Okay, that's your 5 minutes, Mr. Cake.
No worries.
Yes, Scott.
Mayor, another minute, Mayor, sorry.
Oh, it won't be long. The final...
Okay, wrap it up. Yep.
The final change was an addition of a thermal camera to pole 2 in order to compensate for the loss of coverage created by reducing the height of pole 3. Whilst we consider that the original application was appropriate for approval, these additional changes further reduce the amenity impacts without compromising any of the original proposal's compliance with the relevant planning framework, which has been addressed in detail in the Council agenda. In light of the relevant changes that have been made to the proposal and its compliance with the applicable planning framework, it is kindly requested that Council vote to approve the application for temporary planning approval in accordance with the relevant officer recommendation at next week's Council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cake. Question? Councillor Richardson, you are first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question regarding the system. I just want to clarify a few points. What is the thermal mass set at, the minimum for this particular system?
I don't know the actual figures around it, but there's differences in body temperature of animals, humans, things like that. So it's closely related to the temperature of a human body, effectively.
That would pass as a large dog then, or
No, the way the system can be calibrated is it's quite close, and it'd be very unlikely that a dog would resemble the same thermal mass as a human, based on what the security expert has told us.
is it possible to get that clarification for the minimum mass?
Yeah, I could probably get
What
that
did
from
we
the
say?
security expert, yep, before next week.
That lighting that you mentioned, also the 2 lux brightness.
Yep.
How long does that actually trigger on and off for while that person's in? What is the time that it triggers on and off for?
The
Does it
light
remain
will-
on after it's been triggered?
No, so the light will only remain on when the intruder is in range of that camera. So as it sort of moves in and out, the light will go on and off as necessary. So if the intruder stays in that area, the light will stay on.
So it's quite a large property, so therefore the time that the intruder is on the property, is that then possible that it's going to shine into the neighbour's, yard or, detract at night time? They're going to see it going on and off?
The light will only be on when the intruder's on site.
Yep.
And when the light is on, the lux level will only be a level of 2 lux, which is compliant with the relevant Australian standard.
Okay. And also, who's monitoring the system again?
My understanding is it'll be a mix of our client and also an external security agency. I'd need to clarify that with my client, though.
And if the verbal warning isn't effective and the client's not home, who triggers that second interaction with the intruder?
More likely than not, it'll be the homeowner or the resident.
So we're not sure.
No.
So if they're not home, then what happens?
I'd need to seek clarification.
So we don't actually know what happens once that verbal message that you said is not raised above a certain point of a conversation. We don't actually know what the next stage is.
I'm sure my client would.
Okay.
I just need to get clarification.
Can we have that clarified, please?
Yeah, he's outside.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Kiley, I think you're next.
Thanks, Regan. You said that it was compliant with the applicable planning framework. It was compliant. However, if I was to or if you applied to put a flagpole up on that property, do you realise that you couldn't get a flagpole above 6 metres under our local planning scheme?
I wouldn't know the land use permissibility or development.
So any
requirements for a
flagpole in a residential area has to be no greater than 6 metres. But this pole at the rear at least is 8.5 metres, and then we've got to put on the additional material on the top of it. So if it was a flagpole, we wouldn't permit it under the local planning scheme.
Yep.
However, we've got 6 flagpoles of various sizes, really. And the other issue I've got with it is that if a sign, if you were to put up lighting in any, or the other issue, if you put up a flagpole, you can't put up it in a heritage area. And given Guildford's a heritage area, the local planning scheme says that we can't put up flagpoles. I know there's one at the primary school, but I can refer you to that if you like, Councillor, the page. But limit on flagpoles has to be 6 metres. Are you also aware that under the local planning scheme that if you were to put up lighting in on poles in a yard in Guildford, that the maximum height is 2.5 metres for any pole?
I'm not aware of that exact provision, no.
That's in our local planning scheme. Are you also aware that if you were to put up a sign in Guildford, in your property, that you can't put up signs in your property? Like it's on a pole, effectively the same as a sign. Are you aware that you couldn't put a sign up in your yard, let alone 6?
Yeah, there's no signage proposed in any of these poles.
But I'm just drawing a comparison between, the attention that these lights, cameras and speakers would get would probably be similar to a sign if you put it up in the front yard or in your backyard. So also in Guildford or within a residential area, you can't put up an antenna or a satellite dish in our local planning scheme. So there's a whole... Basically what I'm saying is that it appears that the local planning scheme is directing us to say do not approve inappropriate poles being put up within a yard. So I'm just wanted to know whether that's come to your attention at all when you looked at our local planning scheme.
The scheme doesn't expressly prohibit the poles that we're proposing and the security that we're proposing.
Okay.
I guess it's an incidental structure to the single house.
But the poles will have lighting on them, correct?
At the top of the light, yeah, that'll be triggered whenever an intruder is on
And are any of
site.
those poles over 2.5 metres in height?
They are, yes.
Well, I'd suggest then that you need to look at the local planning scheme because it says...
Councillor Kylie, you got any
It says
questions
clearly
relate
that
to
the
item?
poles are not to be permitted. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scanlon, I got you next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 4 questions. So the first one, what is the maximum volume of the speakers?
I'd need to check our submission to confirm that.
Great, thank you. And secondly, what studies have been done on the effect of the wildlife on the surrounding area?
I don't believe any submissions were provided on the effect of the wildlife.
Okay. Does the applicant, I'm sure they know that there's a great deal of wildlife in the area and the riverbank just behind the property. That's a real concern of mine, that it will have a very detrimental effect.
What sort of effect do you think it might have?
Sorry, we have some, there's 20 frogmouth owls, there's many other owls, and the bright lights, the noise. So the light is a big thing. So because they, obviously when they come to nest in the trees, animals, go to dark places at night, and the light will frighten them and perhaps they'll move to the area. I mean, I'm not a wildlife expert, but I suggest one should be consulted.
Yeah, I guess my response to that would be that the lights are only ever activated when the intruder's on site, which is more than likely going to be quite an unlikely occurrence, you would hope.
They're still very bright lights that would be activated at night.
As far as the level of the lights are concerned, it's compliant with the relevant Australian standards as far as the lux level provided on the adjoining properties.
Okay. Well, I'm still concerned about the neighbouring wildlife, and it's a valid concern.
Okay, your other questions, Councillor?
Thank you. So the areas adjacent to the property on either side are 2 heritage houses which are on the tourist walk. They have tourist signs. So with tourists passing this building, I do believe that these speakers will have a detrimental effect on tourism in Guildford, which is something the city is trying to promote. How is the applicant going to offset that?
The speakers will have an impact on the tourists?
The poles, the look of the poles from the street, it alters the streetscape.
As it was sort of outlined in the agenda prepared by the city's officers, the poles are not dissimilar to a light pole or a telephone pole, and they're set back further than a light pole would be from the street, being obviously located on the property. So I guess it's our position that it blends in with the streetscape, in addition to the landscaping being provided around the base of the pole and things like that as well.
I differ in opinion because they're not street lights.
No, they're not.
No. And my 4th question, thank you for your patience with all my questions, is when the tourists do pass, what's to stop those lights, particularly I believe it's pole 6, which is quite proximal, where tourists will be looking at the other houses. What's to stop the system being set off?
The system, unless they enter the property itself, the system won't be triggered, as the range of the cameras and the thermal cameras and the lights and the speakers, and the system won't be triggered unless they're actually within the range of the camera on site.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I forgot there was one other question. Sorry, you just reminded my other question. So, is this security system really designed to prevent people going near the property because it's of its nature of not being discreet? So a lot of people would have very discreet cameras. For instance, in this building, you can't see where the cameras are. They're quite discreet. And alarm systems also, but they're there, and they're very, I'm sure they're very efficient. What is the purpose of these not being discreet?
I guess the system itself sort of looks outside in, and I guess the benefits we see of that are that it enables the early detection of when an intruder might be in the yard, as opposed to when they reach the house, because the site is quite large and there is a significant amount of landscaping, outdoor area and things like that included as part of it. So it allows that early detection to hopefully, encourage an intruder to leave, as opposed to continue carrying out his break and enter. And also, the poles being outside looking in, it also enables the direction and control of the lighting as well, to ensure that it actually does comply with the Australian standards, as opposed to, say, lighting that would be affixed to the house looking towards the adjoining properties. It's more than likely that wouldn't comply with the 2 lux level, and obviously approval for that wouldn't be required either.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Councillor Catalano, I'll get you next.
Thanks. I just had a quick question. I just wondered if you knew, you mentioned something about vandalism. He experienced vandalism at that site. So what was the nature of the vandalism?
I think there's been something, I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but obviously there's an existing building there and things like that. It might have been existing walls.
So you don't know?
I don't know the details.
Okay, you don't know. But you've said that there's vandalism in support.
Correct.
You don't know.
My client has advised me that it's been vandalised.
So, there's no evidence about that tonight. Thanks.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my question is, again, is about the need for this system. Does your client have a similar system at his home in Bassendean?
My client's actually here. If you wanted him to respond to a few questions.
Yes, please.
It's probably a lot easier.
Yeah.
Gentleman, to answer the question. Mr. Hanson, I believe it is, isn't it? Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
Thank you. Sorry, just to go back to cover off some of the points that you've been discussing so far, is that the system is designed, as Regan was saying, to be on the boundary of the property looking inwards. And the primary function of that is to ensure that there are no false alarm events by other people walking around their normal business, and that there's no focus on the attention of recording anybody. It's all within the property. And to do that, the most efficient way is to be inward looking, and that it also has the impact of being able to have the lowest light impact on anybody in the community by ensuring that the light falls within the area of the property. Because the lights are focused downwards, they're not sitting at a lower height shooting across the room, which I can't stop a light going any further. I don't have the ability to do that. With the security camera, you've got the ability to control its range by blanking out what it can see, but I can't stop the travel of light. By putting the camera higher, looking down, I can keep the light focused on and within the property. So it was also being discussed about how many events, what was the duration, what happens if a crime proceeds. According to the state statistics by the police, the likelihood of us being broken in to the worst case scenario is 3 times a year. Potentially 7 attempts a year, worst case scenario. And a lot of times the break-ins start because people think there's low risk of getting caught, or it's an opportunistic thing. They think they'll just have a crack at something as they go past. The duration of a crime is not an hour. It's not generally 30 minutes. It's not 40 minutes. It's usually in a number of minutes. criminals quite often are acting in the shortest possible time to avoid detection and also to avoid alarms being raised. The intent of the system is to try and notify the person that their attention's been attracted, that they're on the property, that they should leave. The alarm state won't keep going on and on and on and on. There's not a light that's going to be going 300 days a year or 50 days a year or a month. It's 7 or 3 times with a time frame of about 10 minutes at the max. Once criminals generally have identified an area that a place is difficult to access, then the rate of break and enter reduces substantially. Once someone's entered the property, as we've described, the lighting system will come on, the camera will record their actions, and they'll be advised of what's happening. If they continue forward and start to attack the fabric of the building, which is as you would have in most residential alarm systems, an alarm will go off. And so the normal alarm that you would expect to have of someone coming in and interfering with your house won't occur until someone's gone to all the trouble of starting to attack the fabric of the building. Hopefully, we've been able to dissuade them in the 7 times that this might happen a year to turn around and go away, in which case the likelihood of the light being off is 7 times a year for maybe about 5 minutes, if we were unlucky. So
the question is, do you have a similar system in your home in Bassendean?
Councillor Johnson.
So yes, we have over the years had to raise the level of security that we have, because as the police have advised us, we're being targeted and there's nothing that they can do to stop the people coming in and breaking into our houses.
So I guess the question is, do you have these similar poles, 3 to 4 metres high around your home in Bassendean?
At this point in time, no, I don't.
I guess then the follow-on question is, why do you think that Guildford is so much more dangerous than Bassendean?
No, that's an incorrect direct extension. You're saying that it's more dangerous. The thing is what is the target? The target of what someone's aiming for in our home in Bassendean versus our home in Guildford is significantly different. It's a lot more value, so it's a more interesting target. It's likely to attract more attention. And it's not a matter of today I decided I'll have this here, but I'll never have that there. As Mr. Regan was explaining, we've had 9 break-ins into our house. The last time, it was with threatened violence. Our whole family had left the property. My son returned. There were 2 people attacking our property. My son was physically threatened that he would be beaten up by 2 gentlemen who were capable of doing so. My son retreated. A neighbour's gardener saw the crime occurring, went in, was filming these people and said they should stop and leave. That did not stop them at all. They threatened that gentleman with violence, continued with their crime. They grabbed the property, they threw it over the 1.8 high metre fence we have, jumped the fence and ran off with the property whilst threatening to harm people.
So I guess the question is, do you think that's going to happen in Guildford? Because I've not heard of such crimes in Guildford.
There's not a huge difference.
So in that case, why do you need this security system in Guildford when you don't have it in Bassendean?
You haven't listened to what I've said, Councillor. This is what I've done here, that's what I've done there, and I don't think that's good enough, and that is good enough here. It's been a development over time. If I was staying in Bassendean and I had a property of that size in Bassendean, I would choose to do exactly the same today. I don't have that size of property in Bassendean, sir. I don't have that area to protect. I don't have people coming in vandalising my property to such an extent. The building is of an enormous value. The last event we had vandalism, someone broke in, stole portable tools and decided that they would engrave some graffiti in a wall of travertine at the building. There's $30,000 to me that's gone because someone was having a fun time at that particular point. They then proceeded with the spray can and ran around the house spraying things all throughout the property. Other events we had people come in and chop all the wiring off, just drag it through the property and leave it. Not to steal it, just cause harm and damage.
I can assure you, if you move to Guildford, you won't experience such things. Do you see other people in Guildford with similar security systems to this?
So you're not understanding what I'm saying to you. How many other homes are on a near acre block in Guildford that are of similar value of construction? You answer me that, sir.
I can't tell you how many, but that are a lot.
You've
got any further questions, Councillor? Councillor Kiley, I've got you next.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. Mr Hanson, you mentioned the reason why you needed the apparatus, I'll call it, on the poles and and you wouldn't have it on the building is because you said the motion of the cameras would pick up somebody walking by. And now that's important because you have said on numerous occasions, you said it would pick up people outside of the property.
No.
That was the reason you just gave before. Now, just let me finish here. You gave that as a reason as to why you couldn't have it on the poles, whereas we've been told numerous times that the cameras are not allowed to pick up people outside of the property.
You're talking about two things.
Well, that was the reason you gave. That was the reason you gave.
Councillor, can you just wrap up the question? I know what you
I'm going to ask a question. If I can finish the question, Mayor, that'll be.
Councillor Kiley has been really, really derogatory when pointing his finger and pointing this. That has been nasty. That's not being asking a question.
Councillor McNamara, you're pointing a pencil. You're pointing the pencil at me, just the same as I'm raising my.
It's enough.
You're in the habit of lifting the pencil, so I don't mind doing it either.
Councillor Kiley.
Well, I'm just trying to get my question out. That's all.
Councillors.
So I
this
understand.
behaviour is atrocious. Councillor Colley, I will ask you to show a little bit of respect and just phrase your question to Mr Hanson so he can answer you.
Well, I'd ask you, Mayor, to ask Mr Hanson to let me complete my question.
Yes, just let's get the question over with so we can see what he's got to say. Thank you, Councillor Colley.
The question is, why, when you have said on numerous occasions that the cameras would not be picking up anybody outside the property or on the street, are you now telling us that the reason you can't have it on the property, on the building itself, and it has to be on poles, is because it would pick up people outside the property?
Okay, sir. You're talking about two things. I understand how passionately you feel about that, and that's acceptable.
If you could just answer the question rather than prolonging it. Thank you.
Answer the question, Councillor
I was
Colley.
notifying that I understand why you're angry about it, so I accept that fact. So there's two things. One is the recording of someone, and that will not happen under any circumstances because we can blank that out.
I'm not referring to recording.
Councillor Kiley, you wanted to get your question out. Now, Mr Hanson's attempting to answer it. Please show him the respect and let him answer you. Carry on, Mr Hanson.
The detection and recording are two different things. So the thing I'm saying about focusing down into the property is about the detection technique. Nothing is recorded with the detection technique. It is to identify someone moving within the property. And you are quite correct. I've assured you many times that we won't be filming outside our property, and we won't because to adhere to the standards, we should not do so. And I have no intention of filming anyone in the public at all or in their private environments.
Through you, Mayor. So you're referring now to recording as opposed to cameras actually being able to observe people outside the property?
No, that's not correct, sir. Observing, under the rules, the observation, which is separate from recording, they're two separate matters, cannot occur, and we do neither. What I'm saying is detection, which is not observation, is best done by being on the boundary of the property and looking down into the property to avoid any false detection.
Okay, just to follow on then, do you have a dog? Have you ever had?
I do.
Okay. Why, if security is of such great concern to you, do you only have a fence at the rear of the property of 1.4 metres high, which would be easy for anybody to jump over?
Because I have asked to have higher fences and I have been refused, sir.
Any further questions, Councillor Colley?
Yeah, just to follow on. You mentioned you're looking at an average of 7 break-ins, potential break-ins a year. Is that correct?
According to the police, WA published police stats, yes. If I was unfortunate enough.
Councillor Richardson, I've got you next.
Thank you, Mr Hanson. I did ask earlier just the questions regarding what the thermal mass was, the minimum set for that particular system in regard to sizing of a large dog.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that minimum set at?
So the criteria, as Regan said, is a combination of thermal mass and what they call an artificial intelligence, which is basically looking at the movement patterns of the object that they're observing. So a dog typically behaves differently from a human. So the thermal security cameras are trying to determine what the object is by its size, by thermal mass, and also how is it moving. And so through those, I can't give you an exact figure for it, and I will go and find out an exact figure. I don't know that it beneficially answers your question, other than to say I'm willing to provide an assurity that it doesn't go around detecting dogs. And I wouldn't be spending this much money on the system if it did go around detecting dogs. It's of no use to me, and it would be of no use to the community.
Just with most household systems, obviously people have large dogs and they can set that ratio on some systems. So for a system that's quite extensive, I'd be quite interested to know. What is the name of that system that you've implemented?
So it's Hikvision is the primary supplier of the components that we're using. And thermal cameras are a complete subset, and it's a very advanced detection system. The whole point of it is to stop false alarms.
But most security systems all have false alarms. How can this system guarantee there are no false alarms?
Because most security systems don't have thermal imaging cameras.
And just quickly as well, we talked about the verbal warning. Is this system actually monitored by a company?
At the present, the system is not monitored as in we've got 24 hours someone sitting down watching cameras looking at it. By alert of action, yes, someone will respond to it and look at it to see what's going on.
So then if you're not home and not within a 5 to 10 minute radius of the property, because we know that that's a response time, the police won't come between, you'd be lucky if that's 20 minutes.
So, as I said, there will be someone supervising it who will have control of the system to be able to make a determination as to whether this is a real event or not.
Thanks.
Councillor Scanlon, I've got you next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for speaking, and I'd just like to firstly say I'm sorry to hear of the experiences that you've had in Bassendean. I certainly hope you have no experiences like that in Guildford. I've found it to be a lovely place to live. I wanted to ask you a couple of things that would help improve the amenity and the streetscape in this beautiful part where you've built. I'm wondering if you would consider reducing the height of the poles to 2.5 metres, which would be more compliant with our local planning scheme.
Okay. The design of the poles is not my personal definition of what a pole should be. It's been done by the security firms. They are the people who've defined it. The size of the pole, its height, its location has not been under my design. My criteria has been about not having false alarms every 5 minutes, because I can assure you it serves me of no benefit at all. I'm also a person who has suffered, personally, health-wise, and had mobility issues. I don't want to be looking forward to in the future, because I intend to stay in Guildford a very long time, to be in a situation where I can't respond to looking after myself and being able to manage immediate threats to my health. I've seen it with my elderly family members that the crime rate is more focused and gets more attention as they detect you being of older age. It's a matter of fact. They just find it easier that they think they can deceive you. So I intend to be a resident of Guildford for a very long time, probably until my death. If it's not with anyone this room can stop me doing otherwise, but that's what I'd like to do.
Not at all, not at all.
And when it comes to the thing of visual height that everyone keeps referring to, people are overlooking the fact that there is no vegetation on the site at the moment. Nobody looks at this and says, oh, look, there's the landscaping in place. I know what the end game's going to be and what the final impact will be. Landscaping on the property is going to involve bringing in trees of mature size and variety that are appropriate, and there will be trees coming into the property that will already be of 5 metres in height. So some of the poles, you really are not going to see the bulk of the pole once the landscaping is complete.
Thank you for that answer. And just a couple of further questions on that. The poles will be visible in part, and they are above 2.5 metres, which I believe our local planning scheme stipulates they must be below. So they'll be in part visible, especially from the streetscape and from your neighbours' properties.
Councillor? So first of all, the WA Heritage Council has assessed the streetscape and they have offered an opinion that it has no substantial impact. So WA Heritage are quite okay with the poles being in the front yard. So that has already been considered as a matter by people of expertise.
I understand that, and but this council has our own opinion, and the City of Swan has our own opinion on heritage, and that's what we're assessing. But I understand that the Heritage Council have said that. However, there's a difference of opinion. Yes, thank you. One more question. Would you agree to remove pole 6?
No, because it would make the system not operational. It would leave a large part of my property as an area that could be attacked and vandalised.
Would you consider directing one... Last question, please, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much for your patience. Would you consider directing the company who do have the expertise in security to reduce the heights of the poles and remove pole 6 so that you still have a wonderful security system to protect yourself and your family?
Without having to go through and identify all of the individual assets within my property, there are extremely valuable assets located directly close by that position, and it doesn't make any sense for us to inhibit that area of the system to say that there's no security provided on it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you very much. After Mr Cake's comments, I have a question about your insurance policies. How many increases have you had of your policy and excesses to your general insurance increases, and over what period?
Okay, the property's been under construction for 6 years, as my neighbour has pointed out. There's only been one significant increase, and that was after the first major vandalism and damage event. And with an excess of $25,000, it makes it quite difficult to accept. But I've tried every way I can to find other insurance, but I'm unable to.
Councillor Lucas, I've got you next.
Thank you. Hopefully mine will be a simpler question. I believe as a result of SAT mediation, there's a proposal to change the colour of the pole to a woodland grey, but on the second round of public submissions after that, there's been a suggestion that woodland grey would be similar to the current galvanised colour. Would you consider, and I'm not saying the poles are going to be approved or not, but if they are, would you consider a green coloration rather than the grey coloration?
So I'm happy to consider colours that are effective. The mediation member from SAT advised that in her long history with dealing with objects of this shape and proportion, that either a green or a black colour best blends in with the rear environment of a landscaped environment. We ourselves have a property where we've used woodland grey very effectively, and it's due to the difference between the colour of the bark and the colour of the leaves as it merges together to make the pole disappear. So, yes, I'm happy to consider.
Councillor Richardson.
Just a last question, if we can consider this. Mr Hanson, the 9 break-ins that you've described all occurred at Bassendean, is that right?
That's correct. They're separate from the ones in Guildford.
Yeah, and what's the rough timeline of the first to the last?
So they've been over it's occurred in different waves. For the first 7 years, we had very few break-ins. We've been there 26 years now. And they started accumulating at a rate. I don't have an exact plotted date line. I can't remember all the individual dates. If you want to, I can respond to you on that basis. My wife remembers them off the top of her head for some strange reason. But they've accumulated, and each time the police visited, we asked them what were we doing wrong. And they said, you weren't doing anything wrong, but you need to increase the level of your security. And that's what we've done. We went through a period of putting infrared beams across the backyard to do early detection of people entering the property. That worked because we had invasions for about 5 or 6 events, but the alarm would go off, we'd respond, and then they stopped jumping over the back fence. We put up a front 1.8 metre fence with a gate, no pedestrian access. That until the recent break-in and theft and had been enough, but apparently it's not enough anymore.
Okay. And with those, was it daytime, nighttime? Like, are they?
There's a complete variety of events, depending upon the intruders and what they're doing. So the last one was 9:45 in the morning. So daytime, everyone going about their normal business. I don't think the perpetrators would have known we were at home or not at the time that they did enter the property, because they jumped over a spiky 1.8 metre fence to get in to commit the crime they're intending to do.
And
this will be your last one, Councillor. Then we're going to move to the next item.
In the prospective future, if this system for some reason isn't successful, what do you have in place then as a next stage?
So, as the mediation process was with the City of Swan, it was considered an option in your consideration would be to grant a temporary approval, so it gives the opportunity for the system to be assessed, for us to continue and paint the poles so the pole colour goes in, the landscaping goes in, and we get a time to operate the system so that it could be proven out whether it is that detrimental to the rest of Guildford as a community or wildlife or whatever that might be. And so that was put forward as a recommendation by the SAT member, and at the time there was enough consideration to do that, and that's why we've done the resubmission. Our neighbour to the west, we hadn't taken into consideration the new buildings that they're going to do. As soon as they advised us of that, we consulted with them, and they have the greatest impact of anybody, and we kept our security system to the right level, but were able to make some fine-tuning that fitted with theirs, so they compromised.
I guess
and so
I
did
meant
we.
after this, or whether it is or isn't approved, if it's not successful.
If there's a temporary approval, it's only
no,
for a period
if it's
of
not,
time.
if let's say if it is granted or isn't,
if
it's
not
not
granted,
successful
then
in terms of break-ins, though, what would you need to do then on top of what you're already doing?
I'm unsure of what anyone can do other than going to armed guard patrol sort of thing,
right?
Or dogs patrolling your yard all the time while you're indoors.
Okay,
it's quite
Thank you,
a severe
Mr. Hanson.
level.
I'm going to take one last question for Councillor Coley. We've done this to death, and we've had a whole heap of questions that aren't even relevant to a SAT appeal. So, Councillor Johnson, your last question.
Just one question. Mr. Hanson, in the interests of good neighbourly relations being established from the start of your residence in Guildford, would you be prepared to consider reducing the poles in height to 2.5 metres?
So I
think he's already answered
that question, that they need to be this height to be operational, and that's obviously you guys vote on it. That's what the process is for. I understand, and you may choose to refuse me, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Thank you, Mr. Cake. Councillor, we now move on to item 4.4, Development WA Asset and Project Handover. And we have Mr. David Tucker from the Swan Community Workshop Group in support of the recommendation. If Mr. Tucker's with us. Thank you, Mr Tucker. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this evening, which I do so on behalf of all members of the Swan Community Workshops. My name is David Tucker. I'm a member of the Swan Community Workshops Management Committee. I'm also on the board of Bicycles for Humanity, which is one of the member groups. I'm here primarily to express Swan Community Workshops' strong support for the concept of a Midland Community Foundation as presented to you by Town Teams, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. The Town Teams concept, as we understand it, provides an exciting opportunity to turn the Midland Railway Workshop precinct into a vibrant community hub. Supported by the Foundation and complementary commercial enterprises. We thank the City for recommending a community governance option for the future of the workshops. Some of you will recall that this was very much part of the original Swan Community Workshops model developed about 6-7 years ago. We also fully support the City staff recommendation and ask that the Council actively engages with State Government to support the establishment of a community foundation through Town Teams. We see this as a project that will celebrate the heritage, promote culture and support community use of the Railway Workshop, a historic site. I don't have to tell you, is probably one of Western Australia's most significant colonial heritage sites right here in the heart of your city. We understand the City's recommendation would enable the State Government to retain ownership of the land and subsequently to issue management order to the proposed community foundation to activate, manage and maintain the workshop on its behalf. Furthermore, the foundation would be empowered to retain revenue generated from leasing the site to cover maintenance costs and to support community and cultural use of the site in the future. The wide spectrum of community organisations represented by Swan Community Workshops are and have been contributing to community wellbeing and development in the City of Swan for some time. Some, like the CWA, have been doing it for a very long time. Others, like Midland Men's Shed, Machinery Preservation Club and Bicycles for Humanity, are relatively recent, but all, among other outcomes, are making real contribution to mental health, especially for men in the community. All have been doing so in temporary accommodation for as long as the past decade or more. Swan Community Workshops is keen to work with Town Teams, Development WA and relevant state government agencies to breathe new life into the Railway Workshops precinct and with community-driven approach to land management and maintenance which embraces the heritage and community culture. We see this opportunity as a game changer. Not only for the associations themselves, but for the whole community of Swan. Indeed, an opportunity for the City to show leadership in the broader community. We thank Town Teams for the Midland Community Foundation proposal and its offer to prepare the business case and hopefully make it happen. We thank the State for proposing the use of the Heritage Precinct at the Railway Workshops for community use.
Yeah, 1 minute, Mr Tucker.
We urge you, the City of Swan, to get behind the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Tucker. Any questions, Mr Tucker, councillors? No? Thank you, Mr Tucker.
Thank you very much.
The next item is item 4.7, which is fencing works at Percy Cullen Oval, Gidgegannup, and Mr Paul Carroll from the Gidgegannup Recreation Club speaking against the recommendation. Welcome, Mr Carroll. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mayor. A report was prepared on the basis of information from an online survey conducted by the City of Swan in 2017-2018. A total of 17 people responded regarding access to the Percy Cullen Centre. They stated that they did not use the centre, but as a result of the gate at the top of the driveway being closed. Following this information, a plan to open the gates was prepared by the City of Swan. This plan involved the removal of the gate and allowing people to drive to a new set of barriers at a position behind the cricket pitch on the oval and beside the children's playground. A fence would also need to be constructed to run the full length of the entrance road in the bush beside the road, with the associated clearing to occur. The cost of these works, provided by the City of Swan, is $35,000. While we understand that there is a need to allow access to the area for all to enjoy, but we also ask that there's a balance this with the risk of damage. The Rec Club has placed a key and register at the Vibe station, which is 50 metres past the current entrance road. People show their driver's licences and are able to obtain a key and enter the reserve and return the key when they leave. This has worked exceptionally well over the last 3 to 4 years that we've had this in place. And in that time we have not had any damage of note at all. The land beside the road under the current proposal would need to be cleared back where the fence line can then run. The land is affected by dieback, and construction would disturb the soil and allow further spread of the dieback. The neighbours on the school side of the reserve have already been affected by break-ins and vandalism, and in recent weeks have had a bobcat stolen from their property. The land at the rear of the reserve has had wood removed, and on the vet side of the city has also spoken about his concerns with people on motorbikes coming into the reserve with it being open. The Rec Club is the current manager of the reserve and the facilities there. We work to ensure that access is in a manner which limits damage and the risk of damage to the buildings, access roads and grounds. The Rec Club and all the affiliated groups and casual groups are issued with a key to the gate, and all efforts are made to ensure that we experience any damage and vandalism, that we don't experience any damage and vandalism. Our groups have all contributed to watching the entrance of the facilities and as available. There needs to be a balance between the access and security, and we certainly understand that, and we are aware, as we've had the oval torn up several times in the past. We believe that we've achieved a balance between the access and the protection of the facility. We would be willing to work with advertising in the Gigagram the availability of the key so that new people are aware of the methodology for accessing the key and being able to enter the grounds. The club member families all use this process without any issue or damage occurring. We've also spoken with the Friends of the Reserve who have shared our deep concerns. We are currently working with the City of Swan to install external fitness gear, and would be concerned if the area was allowed to be damaged if the gates were open on a permanent basis. We'd be happy to work with council staff to look at assisting access without increasing the risk of damage to the area, given that the proposal is a $35,000 investment for 17 people that were new to the area and hadn't been exposed to all that we offer. We hope the council could look at an information booklet for new arrivals, and we would work with staff to prepare the said information booklet rather than expend $35,000, remove the bush and spread dieback. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Questions? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Paul, thank you very much for your presentation and also the hard work that you and your committee do for the Rec Club. Everything you said I completely agree with. What could you do with $35,000?
We would certainly be able to purchase more equipment for the certainly for the outdoor gym setup that we've proposed and are working with council at the moment on. We've also been working with council on a roof system over the basketball courts and the multi-purpose courts, and any contribution towards that would obviously make a huge difference in the progress of that project.
Thank you. I'll be moving for a change in the recommendation there.
Any further questions, Mr. Carroll? Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, that takes care of all the deputations. I'll now go to staff questions, and First off will be the Executive Manager of Planning and Development and Statutory Planning, Mr Russell and Mr Vanden. I think, Mr Russell, all these bar 3.8 are yours. Do you wish to speak specifically on an item or you take questions?
I just take questions, please, Mr Mayor.
Councillors, any questions, Mr Russell? Councillor Coley.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, just on item 3.10, the 3.11 poles in 136 Swan Street. We heard from the applicant that he was refused on numerous occasions to have a fence at the rear of the property greater than 1.4. Can you shed some light on that, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not aware of any applications for the rear of this property with respect to explicit high fencing that have actually been refused. They would have come to council and they would have been refused here. I'm not aware of any, Mr Mayor.
So, in other words, can we conclude that that might not be the case, what we were told in respect of applications to have a higher fence at the rear?
Mr Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll venture this, but I'll do this with some qualification. I can't assume anything in terms of what the applicant has said. It may well be the applicant has inquired with staff around the prospect of having a fence to the rear, noting the rear is to the reserve and has implications with respect to what used to be called the Swan River Trust. It may have been, he received some feedback that he took to be, perhaps rightly or wrongly, an unlikely prospect of getting a taller security fence. It does not mean, in fact, that he was being refused such a fence.
Further, Mayor, if you wouldn't mind, in relation to the local planning scheme, how much value should councillors place on a regulation within the local planning scheme that says poles that have lights on top of them shouldn't be any greater than 2.5 metres in a residential area?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think it's important to be precise and clarify this. The scheme does not say anywhere at all that you can't have such poles. What the Schedule 5 exempted development provisions say with respect to flag poles and outdoor lighting is that you do not have any capacity to be exempt from requiring planning approval in a heritage area. It should not be taken as read that the fact that you require planning approval means it's a prohibition against such poles or such lighting. That would be an incorrect construction of the scheme.
Well, through you, Mayor, what would the meaning in our local planning scheme be of the word exempt? If not, if it's not an exempted development, then are we misinterpreting the word exempt?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can't speak for how parties might interpret our scheme, but I'll say, in fact, that all the scheme provision says is that there is no instances in a heritage area like Guildford that you can have flagpoles or outdoor lighting and not require planning approval. The purpose of which in those sorts of instances is because they're special areas, you need to assess a proposal on its merits to determine whether it's compliant. But the mere fact that it might not meet an exemption provision should not be taken as a prohibition to that development. It would be a wrong interpretation of the scheme.
So just one last question in relation to that. So what in the scheme are we able to assume is a direction? I mean, what value obviously are we placing in the scheme then if we can't have a allowable development and an exempt development? What does the scheme anywhere in the scheme prevent any development of any sort whatsoever then?
Through Mr Mayor, yes, the scheme does prevent various types of development. It's listed in the zoning table where it against that development and the zone says it's an ex-use. It means you're not able to have it. There is no such provisions that relate to this type of incidental or associated infrastructure with a private residence. So that requires approval. Then we're assessing it on its merits against the framework as outlined in the reports and probably as discussed with the parties involved in the SAT.
Mayor, I'll be seeking legal advice through the week, if that's all right, on this. Thank you.
You can do that if you wish, Councillor, from wherever you wish to get it. Any other questions, Councillor Scanlon?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question's regarding item 13.6. Is this still for Mr Russell?
13.6. Yes, that is Mr. Russell.
Okay, thank you. Now, I actually have a few questions. So the first one is, which government body or other entity were approached after the motion on 29 July concerning options for purchase, rezoning or protecting portions thereof?
Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City staff did not approach any government bodies or any other agencies regarding the acquisition of the land. The city staff approached, as in accordance with the council resolution, the owner to determine whether he might be interested to sell the land.
Furthermore, the council resolution was also following the petition, and the petition was to investigate options. Now, other questions are, was the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions consideration only concerning whether the development was likely to affect waters in the Swan Development Control Area, or did it include other ways of protecting the biodiversity, conservation and attraction? And was this referral made after July 29?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, in terms of what happened after the July council the resolution in July, a few days after the council resolution, the letter that we've circulated to you as a confidential attachment was received from the landowner, in which he offered the land at a specific price to the city to buy. Now, whether you that's the price. So what he said is, that's my price. If you're really interested in preserving this land, that's the price. I'm happy to sell it to you. So that negated the need to determine whether there's any other possibilities of approaching him to purchase the land, because he offered it to the city at that price. So on that basis, the report was prepared, and we're saying the land, and remember the petition required us to look into how the site could be purchased. So that included all three properties. The submissions tonight relates to a part of the property, whereas the petition related to all three of the properties. So the simple answer is, you don't need to investigate anything. Is that if the landowner already offered it at that price, it's available at that price. Mr. Mayor, if I may, I think it's also pertinent to raise. I've also received an email from the landowner in the last few days, where he indicated that he wants us to confirm to council that what he expects after the letter that you've got. He says that at its September meeting, I'm expecting a decision from council to either accept my price and formalise it through a letter of intent within 7 days, or approve my DA. So that's what is on offer from the landowner. So that may be pertinent for council just to consider that.
Thank you, Mr. Van Linden.
Thank you, Mr. Van Linden. I'm not quite sure why the words of the petition. I'm disappointed the petition wasn't, the wording of it wasn't taken into more consideration, and we only solely focused on the purchase of the land. So, anyway, a further question.
To maybe clarify that, Mr. Mayor, to be able to preserve the land for the purpose of open space, you have to purchase the land. You have to acquire it. So somebody has to acquire it and you can investigate in certain ways of how you can acquire it. But at the end of the day, if the land's made available from the landowner at a certain price, that is the basis of whatever way you're going to look at it, that's his price. So,
certainly, Mr. Van Linden, and thank you. And thank you for that. And perhaps there's a way of preserving it without costing the ratepayer too much, is just all I was hoping for. I'd just like to ask, in the report it talks about offsets, and there's no offsets available in Woodbridge. I'm just wondering, is there a reason why we cannot use an offset from another area?
Mr. Van Linden.
Mr. Mayor, we haven't looked at offsets in this instance, but in terms of the principle of an offset, you can get permission to plant as an offset in a different area, but you have to then look at exactly what the impact of that planting will be as well. So it depends on the density of planting that you will have to be required to do and what implication on bushfire-prone areas and so on would be. So, but that hasn't been looked at in this instance for the reasons that I've mentioned before.
Further question, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, on the same subject, my questions, Mr Mayor, to Mr van der Len, really relating to how can we protect Lot 2? Is it possible to put some sort of protective covenant on Lot 2 that would enable us to approve the development application, but say the trees on Lot 2 should be preserved?
Mr Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think it's salient to take two things and to understand what the party making the deputation around the position about suggesting the thing of concern to the community group as Lot 2, and to actually look at what the application is proposing. There is only a sliver, Mr Mayor, of land under this application, which is essentially for a building pad over the middle lot. There is only a sliver of the embankment of the earth that goes over to Lot 2. And if you look at where that is, there is none of the existing vegetation that is being affected by that. So what I would say here is that the development application that's in front of you in no way entails any clearing or has any impact in terms of the vegetation on Lot 2. You could easily approve what's in front, and the approval relates to the plans, and you would be quite comfortably satisfied that none of the earthwork pad has any impact on remnant vegetation on Lot 2. But you could, if you were desirous to do so, put a condition to indicate that the no clearing of the native vegetation or the vegetation on Lot 2 is to occur as part of that. So you belt and brace it if you wish, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Russell? Okay.
Yep.
Councillor Henderson.
Just to be clear, if there were any offsets, those offsets would come at a cost, wouldn't they?
Mr Van Len, you're nodding your head, so I said that's a yes, is it? Yeah. Okay. All right, councillors, any other questions of Mr Russell or Mr Van Len on any of the planning items? Councillor Catalano.
Sorry, we're just dealing with the 13-point
No,
matters.
any of the planning items
yes.
listed there?
Okay, also all the way through. Well, actually, I'm not quite sure under whose... I've got a question about the delegated authority. Who's that one for?
Well, it's obviously not planning, so we're dealing with Mr Russell and Mr Van der Len at the moment.
Fine, thank you. And just the... okay, yeah, that's fine. I've got also one about 5.4, which is the rating exemptions, but that will be someone else again, will it?
On which one, sorry? That'll be,
the rating exemptions.
That would be Ms Lay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Henderson, your hand was up first.
Thank you. Question on 3.5. The concept of the youth centre in Ellenbrook, approving it's one thing, funding is another. So have we actually got confirmed funding from lotteries?
Ms Lay, you want me to answer that? Mr Coaten?
The funding for the whole project hasn't been confirmed. The report tonight is in relation to the planning approval for it. So we're doing a number of things concurrently with the project.
So can I be clear then? So we're putting the cart before the horse. We don't actually have all the money yet? Is that right?
I would disagree with you, because on projects like this you can't do things sequentially. They would take years and years to do. So we've got 597 capital projects and they've all got numerous components, so we're doing them concurrently to get them done as quickly as we can.
All right, then, well, what is the percentage chance of us getting the lottery's funding then, Mr Coaten?
I don't think that I could answer that. Oh, Mr Bishop's trying to grasp the microphone, so I might let him have a go.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we actually have put an application in and we're meeting with Lottery West next week seeking additional funding for that project.
Thank you. I've got the answer. There is no certainty. Thank you.
Councillor Catalano.
Yes, sorry. I did actually have a question for Mr van der Linde, actually, because it relates to the delegated authority, which actually his name is next to. And I want to just go to the delegated authority point under page 50. It's sort of after 505. So it's not really numbered, but you can say it's the page after 5. And so about three-quarters of the way down, there's been delegated authority for a temporary car park at lot 788 Workshops Avenue, Midland, recommended approval. So first of all, where is that? Secondly, who's building it? Because it's the first I've heard of it. So could you just explain that one to me a bit more? Thanks.
Mr. Russell, I think.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps if I can ask Councillor Catalano to give us the application number, so you've got your schedules there.
Yes, definitely. It is MRADA 8/2020. Thank you. Temporary car park, if that's the one. Can you see that one there?
My apologies, Mr. Mayor. We just wanted to make sure we've got the correct application. My understanding is that was a referral that we received from Development WA on a proposal on the private hospital site on the MRA land for a temporary car park to facilitate car parking whilst there's extensions to the existing hospital being made. And that car park will also facilitate overflow parking during the construction of the train station site itself. So although it's not specifically for the train station, it's for overflow parking at the existing hospital, and whilst they'll be extending that hospital, they will need additional parking. So it's to facilitate the parking issue in the interim until the longer-term hospital sites are developed and there's proper public parking provided in the area.
Has that approval been given?
No, so that is just the city just provided a comment to the MRA, to the WA Development WA, and they will make the final decision on that application.
Development WA. Do we know when they're going to be making that? Got any ideas?
No, I don't have any idea.
No.
It wouldn't be too far from now. It will probably in the next few months.
Okay. All right. Just on that Development WA. So once they've handed over all the assets and everything that they're going to be doing under these items that we've got on the agenda, that means that thereafter there will be no further development applications from them. Is that correct?
There are two components of the normalisation to consider, Mr. Mayor. There's a component of where Development WA will hand over assets to us. So that's roads, buildings, and so on. That's part of the reports on the agenda tonight. The other component of the normalisation process is the handover of the town planning scheme back to the city, which is a separate aspect. And in that regard, we're working with Development WA in preparing a scheme to incorporate that area into our town planning scheme. So it's two separate issues, but so only after the town planning scheme has been normalised and given back to the city, it's only at that stage that they won't make decisions on applications.
Thank you. And just one last question. When do you think that's likely to be finalised, the town planning scheme?
Not before, definitely not before the end of 2023. It will probably be even after that.
Councillor Parry, I've got you down for a question. No? Councillor Richardson, I think your hand was first.
Thank you. It's in regard to the Ellenbrook Leisure Centre. So is it Mr. Coaten? Or
Mr. Coaten?
Yes, that is me, but that's a confidential report.
would you in this one or next?
Yep. Okay, so Okay, Councillor Johnson, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, about 3.8, the adoption of the Morrison Road Local Area Plan. My question, I believe, is for Mr van der Linde and relates to, would it be desirable to postpone the approval or the adoption of the local area plan until such a time as we've completed the heritage assessment of the properties within the area of the plan?
Mr van der Linde?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I've looked at that in preparing the comments on the submissions that we've received. If the properties that's proposed to be investigated have a heritage significance, it will not have a direct impact on the local development plan, because purely those buildings will be preserved. And the local development plan, all the local development plan is doing is guiding the access arrangements around those properties. So it wouldn't impact it from that perspective. And then also from an amalgamation point of view, which is the other objective of the local development plan, those buildings could be accommodated on an amalgamated site within a development. So I wouldn't think it's needed to be postponed at this stage.
Thanks. And I guess the question also, I'd like to ask another question about the scope of the local area plan. If I look at the actual plan itself on, let me get it, I think page 250. So is the plan everywhere within that? I think it's kind of a dark purple line. Or is it just for the areas within the orange lines or the red lines? So is it just about the proposed amalgamation?
It's definitely...
I can rephrase this to make it easier to understand. Is it everything within the precinct boundary, or is it just the proposed amalgamations that are the subject of the development?
It's everything within the precinct boundary.
Okay.
So on that map, the indication of those properties with the red lines, basically just indicating those properties that are in ownerships that will require combined accesses to the sites. For the rest of the precinct, the principles still apply, that we would prefer the lots to be amalgamated because you get a better build outcome when you do it that way.
What would be the effect of deferring the approval of this development plan until we've received the heritage assessments, and how long would that take?
The effect of it will be that there won't be the local development plan won't be in place. So if you do receive a development application in the meantime, the council will have to rely on the objectives as stated in the structure plan, which underlies this. So you'll be where you're at the moment. Okay. In terms of the timing of the assessments, we need to give those landowners that's identified in the document time to give their permission to do the assessments. The assessments will then have to be done. It would be approximately February, March, if that would be the earliest that you can have it done.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question. Will approving this development plan now, without the heritage assessment, have an adverse impact on those heritage properties if they are demonstrated to have a heritage value?
No, the approval at this stage does not address the heritage. The local development plan that does not address heritage at all, so it won't impact it in any way.
All right, but that actually is my concern, that if we approve this first and then we discover we've got some heritage properties, will there be an adverse impact on those heritage properties once we've identified that they're, say, level 2?
No, Mr. Mayor. At the moment, there's nothing preventing those sites to be developed because the heritage is not in place, so approving this won't change the current scenario in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions of Mr van der Linde or Mr Russell? Councillor Catalano?
Thank you. In relation to the Bennett Springs childcare premises proposal, that's 3.2, page 113, I was wondering, has a traffic study been done in respect of the impact that childcare centre will have on Eltone Road as it goes through Bennett Springs?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, traffic impact assessment was included, and on this reconsideration we've also had that independently assessed by our own consultant who's accepted the findings of the applicant's traffic impact assessment, which covered all of that.
Mr Russell. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. On the same item, and I did ask the question of Mr Coaten earlier today, and it's in regards to that childcare centre on the corner of Bennett Springs Drive and Eltone Road, and about the future upgrade of Eltone Road to dual carriageway. Mr Coaten, if you could just respond, please. Thank you.
Staff have been, as part of planning, considering the dualling of that section of Eltone Road. The plans are on hold at the moment because Main Roads will be scheduled, planning on undertaking some grade separation at Reed Highway and Eltone Road, and so until we see the actual designs of what Main Roads are doing with the grade separation, we're not sure of the alignment and things like that and the impact on Eltone Road. But staff have been doing some planning for dualling it in future, but we don't have any definite plans or concepts at the moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, you got a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is taking us back to 311, the security poles. Just wanted to clarify something. I think what I heard Mr Russell say was, if the poles were less than 2.5 metres, and they were outside of Guildford, they would be exempt development, and therefore they would not need a development consent. Is that correct?
Mr Russell?
Mr Mayor, I'm big on precision, so if you bear with me, I'll read you the exact provisions of the scheme.
Has anyone else got another question while Mr Russell looks that up?
I've got, since we're just mixing it up, I thought we were going to do it but I've got one for Mr Bishop.
Well, we're going to go to other managers prior.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure how you were doing it, whether you're mixing it up or... So we're not going to do Mr Bishop's then?
Yeah, we will do.
Yeah, good.
But
okay, thanks.
Dealing with planning at the moment. You nearly ready, Mr Russell?
I'm just about there, Mr Mayor. I'm not as adept at scrolling through these devices as I should be, but bear with me.
Shall I ask my question?
Well, Mr Russell's nearly ready. I'll carry on. I thought we might have another planning question. Mr Vandal.
Page 182, I believe, Mr Russell.
Yep.
Councillor Luke, did you have a question that Mr Russell doesn't have to answer?
It's on the same item about the security poles.
Yep, you can ask the question, Mr Van Lien. Well, Mr Russell, if you want his answer.
Through you, Mayor, this relates, Mr Van der Linde, to item 3.10, the reconsideration of the childcare premises at Cranley Street, Dayton. Noting the car park, on the left-hand side of the car park, as you view the map on page 319, the car parking bays are 5.4, whereas on the right-hand side they are down to 4.8. Can you tell me why these are not of Australian standards, the parking bays on the right-hand side, why they don't meet Australian standards in terms of parking bay width or length, sorry?
Perhaps, Mr Mayor, if I can answer that. Page 311 of the report, which headlines Review of the Traffic Impact Statement, which covers off on the parking design. The city's engaged consultant, RTSM Consulting, has indicated here that the modification, there needs to be some modification to increase the width of the car park to be in accordance with AS 2890.1 off-street parking facilities, and that's actually been recommended as a tidy-up condition with respect to the recommendation in front of the council for approval. So yes, we've picked up on that, and that has been incorporated in as a tweak.
When you say...
Have you got the other answer yet?
What do you mean a tweak? That doesn't seem to meet standards.
Well, condition 8, okay, I'll read it, Mr Mayor. 20 vehicle parking bays on page 316 for councillors. Condition 8 says 20 vehicle parking bays must be provided on the lot in accordance with the approved plans. The design of vehicle parking and access must comply with Australian Standard, New Zealand Standard 2890.1 as amended. Accessible parking bays must comply with ASNZ 2890.6 as amended. So they will need to ensure that those bays, if they're under width slightly, they'll need to comply with that condition by being the correct width as detailed in that standard.
Just to follow on, if I through you, Mayor, why are we approving plans for undersized parking bays? Why are we recommending approval for undersized submission that has undersized parking bays, not meeting Australian standards, and just making it a condition? If there's no room to fit them in, then surely there's no room to fit them in.
No one suggested there isn't room to fit them in, Mr Mayor. What we're these sort of things we're indicating that your parking bays must comply with that condition by being the correct standard. It's a perfectly adequate application of a standard as a condition to ensure that they build in accordance with the standard.
Further to that, on the right-hand side, parking bays, it doesn't show any barrier between the actual house walls. There is a plan to put in a double-skinned colour-bond barrier, but effectively these car parking bays will be butting right up to the lounges and the kitchens, I believe, of neighbouring properties. Is there potential for damage if someone accidentally bumped the wall, for example?
Through Mr Mayor, I imagine if someone drove forward too energetically and hit the wall, they may well damage it.
And continuing, Mayor, is there a particular type of barrier we could consider to put between the walls of the houses that abut that property, and when I say abut, they are right on the boundary, to protect cars from bumping these walls? Is there a prescribed engineering barrier that we could use? And what would the width of that barrier, in other words, how much would it take out of the 4.8 metre parking bays that are currently planned?
Through Mr Mayor, most frequently you tend to find on these new developments that you will actually have a concrete curb edging to the edge of the car parking area, and the conditions that say seal, curb, drained and line marked usually pick that up. That would be what I would see as the treatment that the applicant puts in, where the car parking is abutting the double-skinned colour-bond fence at the boundary.
But effectively, Mr Russell, that would reduce even further the width of the length of the car parking bays in that respect. Would that be correct?
No, Mr Mayor, that wouldn't be correct, because there is, if you see, there is actually depicted on the plan on page 320, which actually shows a thin section of width, which is landscaping. So you won't have the asphalt seal of the bays hard up against the colour bond area where the fence is. You would have a small strip of land there that separates it out, which the applicant and the plans indicate as landscaping.
Councillor Scott, you've got a lot of questions. It's perfect to take up. Mr Russell. Mr Russell, have you got the answer for Councillor Johnson?
Thank you. I have, Mr Mayor. Okay. So there's two parts here in relation to the exemption table. One which deals with outdoor lighting and supporting poles. That is, as Councillor Kiley pointed out correctly, page 182 of the scheme. And there's other provisions that relate to flagpoles. I'll read this. So if we look at it, the table there on 182 has applicable zone reserve. The first section of the table is about zones other than residential, and in Guildford, of course, we're dealing with the residential zone. And it says this: where the lighting meets all of the following criteria, this is for lighting, is not set more than 2.5 metres above ground level, is fixed to a building on the property, flood lighting is directed only into the land on which it is located. So in those instances there, okay, and that talks about not the instance that we have, which is lighting on a pole. This talks about the instance of lighting being attached to a building. So that exemption doesn't apply in this instance, irrespective of whether it's in a heritage area. If we then go to the further down the provisions which talk about, there was an analogy given in relation to flagpoles, and we read what it says there. It actually indicates there are no instances is a flagpole at any size exempt in a heritage area such as Guildford. So when we're talking about these poles, they're not captured in the provisions of exemption which talk about outdoor lighting where it must be affixed to a building, which they're not in this instance. And if we're talking about the nature of the poles as a flagpole, well, they wouldn't apply as an exemption because they can't be exempt in a heritage area.
I guess there's a follow-on question then. Under what sort of planning rules and regulations or parts of the scheme can we approve these sorts of poles? It sounds like they're not permitted at all.
Mr Mayor, I can't stress strongly enough, and I do encourage the councillors that are involved in this exercise, if they have questions, to deal with the council as representing the council on this. It is absolutely approvable. You would not have been invited by the SAT to approve that which the scheme prohibits. So Councillor Johnson is correct. Neither is there an application with respect to these exemption provisions that apply the instance of this application. And if we go to the Guildford Design Guidelines, there is not a single thing in the Guildford Design Guidelines related to residential areas that make any mention of the nature of things such as flagpoles or the rest of it. So the only thing that the council has got, which is the age-old thing, is we're looking at how this sits with respect to the streetscape and how this sits with respect to the appearance of the poles as viewed from the riverine environment to the rear, the foreshore reserve to the rear. And, as we've talked about here, what potential amenity impacts they may have on adjoining neighbours or other adjoining properties. And I believe most of all of this has been giving an airing in the reports to council and in the SAT mediations, so it is capable of approval. If it wasn't, you would not have been invited by the legal tribunal in this state to reconsider a decision if there was no discretion to approve it.
Thank you, Mr Russell. And I think if you want to debate the town planning scheme, you might make it time to go and meet Mr Councillor. We're running desperately out of time here, so has anyone got any absolute pertinent...
Mayor, I just want to make the point, we shouldn't be in a situation where we're having to debate the town planning scheme. It should be quite
that. I said if you want to discuss it.
Clear cut. And I think it is in this respect that it definitely refers to outdoor lighting and supporting poles. And
Okay,
these poles are way above 2.5 metres.
We're moving on. We've done this item to death. Councillor Catalani, have you got a very pertinent question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask some
Mr.
questions.
Bishop, I think.
Yes, about the unreasonable complainant conduct update. And I just wanted to, basically to know, as part of this update and this sort of review that we're doing, is there... you don't say anything about people who actually are on that particular policy, whose mail is being, scrutinised under that policy. When are they going to come off it? When do people actually get a chance to be normalised? That's what I sort of like to know.
Through you, Mr Mayor, as per the management practice attached, there is a regular periods of review, and those reviews are conducted where the staff meet with the CEO and basically provide a summary of activities over the last 12 months and consider whether it's appropriate now for a person to drop off. So just as we initially got up to, there were 9 initially, somebody has been taken off because based on a review over the preceding 6 or 12 months, it's been deemed unnecessary to continue to manage that way.
Okay, and at what point do we and council get a chance to actually get the results of that review and actually see who's still on the list and, scrutinise the decision that you and the CEO have kind of come together to formulate?
We don't bring those reviews to council. It's a management practice, so we're bringing the practice to council as per when we initially adopted it, so that council was aware of it and how it may impact with council operations. But ultimately, if council want to have a list of who's on that list, we can provide that to council. That's not a problem. We're just not obviously putting it in the report here publicly.
Thank you. Last one, please. Thank you.
This is for Ms Lay, about the 5.4, the Heritage Act exemption. What level of, what category does the property have to be heritage listed at, like in terms of the municipal inventory, for it to qualify for the 50% rate rebate?
Ms Lay?
Mr Mayor, that detail's not contained in the report. I'll take that on notice and provide a response to you.
Oh, thank you
Mr
very
Vanderlyn, I think you've got a response. You had your hand up there.
Mr. Mayor, for you to be able to get a reduction, my understanding is that the property has to be on the council's heritage list, which means that in terms of the categorisation of the heritage properties, that it has to be on either a category 1 or 2.
Thanks. And just there was just one other question,
Well,
and
this
that
will be the last question. And I'll
yeah,
go to
sorry
Councillor
about that.
Henderson.
But yeah, okay. So that has to be on the Heritage Act and not the municipal inventory, correct? Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to advise that I'll be withdrawing item 4.1 to set aside the officer's recommendation to accept the petitioners and for renaming of the street, and if officers could prepare that appropriately with the name Catcham Corner.
Okay. All right, councillors. Any items, planning items, to be withdrawn? Councillor Kylie, you've already got 311 withdrawn.
And 3.10, Mayor, thank you.
3.10. Councillor Scanlon, you've got already 13.6 withdrawn. You're withdrawing another one?
3.11.
Sorry, which one?
3.11.
Councillor Kylie's already withdrawn that one as well.
Yes.
So you
I'd like to also submit.
Submit a return recommendation?
Yes, thank you.
Any other planning items? Councillor Johnson, you're withdrawing a planning item?
Yeah, also 3.11, Mr Mayor, and 3.8. Just a belt and braces approach.
Perhaps three councillors should get together and amalgamate your motion. And 3 point, which is the other one? 8?
3.8.
Any other planning items to be withdrawn, Councillor Kelano?
Yes, the Bennett Springs childcare, which is 3.2. Thank you.
Okay, no others?
And also 4.5.
Are there any items to be withdrawn, councillors?
Others, I'd like to also withdraw the complaints management policy. Thank you.
4.3, Mayor, closure of Morella Road,
Hang on, one at a time.
Sorry.
So, Councillor Kelano, yours was the complaints policy, which is Mr.
Yes,
Bishop.
I would like to do an amendment to that, to the recommendation.
2 point, that's
2.2.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Colley, you were doing one with
4.3, closure of Morella Road, Bullsbrook.
Councillor John, you doing another one?
Yeah, 4.5. I want to withdraw that one. That's the handler of capital projects. My motion will be to delete Workshop Avenue from the list of projects.
Any other planning items? Councillor Perry.
Just got a question, Ms. Leahy, but you can keep going.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, there was a... You submit it next week. Is that the one we talked about? Right, call me on it tomorrow, Councillor. Councillor Zanino. Yes. Yeah, you did. Yeah, earlier, yeah. Right. Now, I had a question on, before we close, on the urgent item. So, is it a short question, Councillor Richardson, on the confidential item?
It's very, very quick.
Okay.
Is it confidential?
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Okay, now behind closed doors, if we can turn off that. And, Councillor, yeah, if you could get your question out in 2 minutes, that would be handy.